I've been wanting to talk to you for a long while. Now that we are in, I don't know, month 9 of this, hostile government takeover, and specifically about
complete with asset stripping and all the standard venture capital shenanigans.
Oh, it's even worse. It's just like, what if it's like the private equity version of the first Trump administration, which is just way worse. And, we've been talking about like the economy a little bit and how it took, 6 months for them to get back to a worse economy or the same economy as like March of 2020. And it took, now we have a recession that's looking like the 2009 Great Recession. But when it comes to these remixes, we're also looking at a kind of militarism that I feel like we saw in the summer of 2020, especially when it came to some of that stuff you saw at the end of the George Floyd uprising, which were unmarked vehicles, disappearing activists, zero due process. Thinking of what I would call an extrajudicial killing of Michael Reinl outside of Olympia. But, there's just been, it's really the police state that we kind of got glimmers of and an insight to in the summer of 2020. But I guess I wanted you to start from there. Like, how is what we're living under ICE, under Customs and Border Patrol, under the police complicity in both of those, how is this sort of related to what has or has not been done since 2020 and the broader sort of Black Lives Matter uprising? I didn't send you these questions earlier, but I know you can roll with it.
Yes, of course. So yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. So let's take some pieces of it. So obviously this is all extremely disturbing. We, on the one hand, we see it as a kind of political theater, but political theater makes it seem less dangerous than it really is. And it's dangerous in a couple ways. First of all, it's just immediately dangerous to people who are going to be subjected to all this enhanced policing. People are being rounded up, people are experiencing, use of force, and from agents who there's no even pretext of accountability. Right. I mean, we can debate how much accountability there really is for local police, but at least there's some political accountability for mayors, et cetera, to keep things from getting totally out of hand. But here we have no even pretense of accountability. But it's also dangerous because this is clearly an attempt to see how far Trump can project his power into liberal blue cities, blue states, et cetera, that can then be used for even more potentially nefarious purposes, like subverting elections, completely shutting down dissent, things like that. So it's extremely upsetting. And we can only hope that there is much more resistance. But if in terms of like thinking about this historically, just in the short run, right, the part of the problem here and part of the weakness of the resistance that's occurring, especially from these elected mayors, is that a lot of these mayors got elected with some of the same rhetoric. My city's out of control. We need police to solve all our problems. Anyone who says defund the police is, just helping the criminals out. And we saw this really concretely in Trump's last term. So in 2019, as part of his reelection strategy, he did something very similar that just did not get press attention at the time because these local mayors went along with it, which was he put out this Operation Relentless Pursuit. And he picked a bunch of Democratic cities like Baltimore, Milwaukee, Memphis, Albuquerque, and said, Cleveland, these cities are out of control, and I'm going to flood them with federal agents and more money for local police. And all these cities said, great, send us more. Like, where was the resistance at Trump's first effort to do this? There was no resistance. There was resistance on the ground. And I was part of a group that nationally tried to help coordinate resistance. And we did webinars and we gave communications advice and little research papers that we wrote up for these local groups who were trying to resist, groups like Decarcerate Memphis and Decarcerate Kansas City, who were doing great work. So then Biden becomes president and pours even more money into local policing. No resistance to that. And
I mean, this is all, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just really quickly, like, I mean, it's interesting because this was, and I'm not sure, maybe, please enlighten me, because, you know, when Black Lives Matter kicked off, you know, you had the Obama administration, you know, putting consent decrees on various police departments that were using militarized tactics that we're seeing now here in, you know, in ICE and CBP, but we've seen in police departments before. Trump revoked that, basically got rid of those. And I'm not sure where Biden even stood on that, but you're saying sort of he poured money into this. What we're seeing similarly, we're going to beef up your local police.
Right. So, you know, Biden did not try to federalize local law enforcement in the way that Trump is doing, which is obviously much, much more dangerous. But he leaned into that same law and order rhetoric, right? Legitimating this idea that if there is a crime problem, which we can debate the facts around that if you want, if there's a crime problem, the solution is to pour more money into police. Right. And to take a kind of carceral solution to those problems. Now, I will just say that Biden, while putting, you know, billions into policing, did put like $100 million into community-based violence reduction initiatives, which then Trump has dismantled. And that was a great investment. But all the rhetoric coming out of the White House was about tough on crime. Yeah. And it's that rhetoric that then enables the Trump agenda.
And in terms of, you know, there were many pieces of legislation that were coming out of the 2020 uprising. The Breathe Act was kind of the most expansive, but the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which I believe never even got across the finish line, but it was a small, very small reform.
Yeah, so the George Floyd Act for me was unfortunately a non-starter. There was nothing in it that would have saved George Floyd's life. It was a bunch of very superficial procedural reforms. The Breathe Act, which was really drafted in consultation with the Black Lives Matter movement and others, had a real blueprint for rethinking public safety at the federal level. And my only hope is that we will get a chance before too much longer to put that back up before Congress and the American people as a model of a real alternative. But of course, the Biden administration and the Democratic leadership in Congress were totally opposed to it. Yeah, totally opposed to it.
We're talking to Alex Vitale, who's the author of The End of Policing. And I think we're kind of like spanning a bunch of things here because we're kind of talking about the state, whether it's ICE, CBP, and, you know, police departments kind of as one very oppressive apparatus that, as you mentioned, is now being federalized by Trump, at least in the case of DC. And we're also talking about narratives. And I think what's really interesting is we're veering into the narrative of crime, which is hard not to when, in fact, because it's actually not clear what the hell Trump is actually doing, right? Because to the voters, the pitch was there's a special kind of migrant crime and we've got to root it out and it's everywhere. And not only they're taking your jobs, but, you know, they're whatever, all the things. These are the migrant crime. And since then, when he's deployed the National Guard to LA and now Chicago and then federalizing the DC police, it's like, well, this is just crime in general. This is blue city crime in general. I don't know, whatever. Meanwhile, ICE is raiding a Hyundai plant and picking up workers, people who are, you know, committing the crime of work and an honest pay, very much not in the shadows. So like, how do we pull these things apart? Because they really are collapsed. And shouldn't the media be pointing out, this is not this is a fucking mission creep. I mean, we all knew it was going to be this. At least people who are smart, in my opinion. It's the idiots and the pundits who are like, oh, no, you said you were only going to go after the criminals. So, but please weigh in.
Yeah. So, of course, this is all about the projection of power, not about public safety. And really, anytime you hear a politician talking about crime numbers, that should be a red flag that I'm getting ready to be sold something that's not good for me, right? That this is a way of winning public support for something that has nothing to do with keeping us safe. So one of the contradictions, interesting contradictions, I think, at the heart of the whole MAGA movement is its relationship with police and safety. Because what we saw, if you remember, on January 6th is like protesters with thin blue line support the police banners, using those to attack police officers.
It's a beautiful image, really.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Schrodinger's thin blue line.
And so, but it's we can understand it, because what it's about is authoritarianism, not public safety. And if we keep that in mind, that will help us see through a lot of this nonsense, that public safety is not at all the concern here. If they were concerned about public safety, they wouldn't be trying to get rid of vaccines. They wouldn't be cutting SNAP benefits for children. They wouldn't be putting people out on the streets, right? They're not interested in the well-being of Americans. They're interested in stealing whatever they can, right? We're transitioning into a kleptocracy. The ruling elite has given up competing with China and the global economy, and is just trying to steal everything they can out of the American economy and the state. So they're using this mobilization of crime talk to accomplish that. So, some of these mayors like Chicago and DC have tried to point out that crime is down, the situation is under control. The commissioner here in New York has tried to wave them off here with that kind of talk. But this imagines, right, that this is motivated by concern about public safety.
Yeah.
Or that they care at all what actual crime statistics are. I mean, Trump has made it very clear he'll just make up numbers about anything that suits his authoritarian agenda. So we're going to have to counter this with something more than just arguing over statistics.
Yes. That it and sort of the task of like pulling apart, real, so this is what I'm hearing, is that it doesn't really make sense to say, well, I do agree we have to go after real crime, because you'll hear, Democrats say that. I mean, I've even said, ICE back in 2017 was like, look, we actually go after cartel violence, and we're not able to do that because all you're having us do is do workplace raids. And so what I'm hearing you say is like, it's kind of this pointless exercise to keep on pulling these things apart, when really go to the heart of what they're doing, which is a power grab. It is authoritarianism. And I think using that phrase, public safety, is really, really key. It's just hard when you're, Mayor Brandon Johnson on the back foot, just kind of like trying to defend some of these initiatives that move money away from policing and towards things like community safety. Talk to me, though, about like Democrats who haven't, like Muriel Bowser in DC, who is working with Trump on the federalization of the police there.
Now, of course, she's in the most difficult position of these mayors because of DC's District of Columbia, because of its special status.
Right.
So it is harder to do certain kinds of things. And to their credit, they have brought some important litigation that stopped, for instance, the complete taking over of the police department, which was attempted. They just, by fiat, were putting in place someone to oversee the police department. They waved that off, and they're pushing back on some of this. But look at the rhetoric. Right? Look at the rhetoric. The rhetoric is so thin and so enabling of Trump overall that is part of what's concerning. And that does differentiate her, for instance, from what's going on in Chicago, where the mayor there has been much stronger in his language. Not exactly what I would ideally like to see, but clearly much stronger. And of course, our mayor here in New York now is essentially an adjunct of Trump, which ironically may have forestalled the immediate deployment of troops here. We'll see how long that lasts. But also the mayor of Los Angeles has been really terrible on this.
Yes, she has.
Using, they say, well, we're not using local police to assist ICE in carrying out raids. But this is inaccurate because they are using local police. Local police aren't chasing people down on construction sites, but what they're doing is they're doing crowd control, traffic management, and most importantly, the active suppression of the protests.
Yes.
It was not federal officials, federal officers of the National Guard that was shooting reporters with less lethal weapons. It was not federal police who were tackling demonstrators and shooting them with less lethal. It was the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department. So they are directly supporting these ICE efforts, and we've seen that here in New York, in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia, and in Minneapolis, and a lot of places where it's been the local police under the control of local Democratic mayors who have been actively suppressing protests trying to resist ICE's takeover.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was going to ask you because, I think this is sort of the point of a lot of your academic work and your advocacy as well. What are the police for, right? And even when you're in a sanctuary city where you're supposed to not cooperate with ICE, you are cooperating with ICE. And absolutely, criminalizing protesters is part of that. Criminalizing people who are trying to see their loved ones or get legal counsel to their loved ones who've been taken by ICE or protest those conditions are absolutely part of that. And so, my big, dumb, naive brain is like, well, why can't the police defend us in these situations? What if, but tell me why that might be naive. Tell me why police can't do that.
Yeah, that's a great example. So there's just a lot of misunderstanding about the actual historical role of police. And, the problem is we labor under this kind of myth of legal formalism that's taught to us in school, that we see on every police procedural that we watch on television 24 hours a day, and real crime podcasts and all the rest, that says, well, we have a set of laws that are produced out of a democratic process that represents the best interests of the entire population, and that police exist to enforce these rules in a way that's supposed to benefit everyone, to create this level playing field for a vibrant, competitive society, right? It's like, that's legal formalism 101. But this is all mostly nonsense. Right? The legal system is not created through robust democratic processes that we all have equal access to. This is very clear, especially today, that these legal frameworks exist to maintain profound and produce profound inequalities. So there's a famous 19th century saying that the law forbids both the rich and the poor from sleeping under bridges, begging in the streets, and stealing bread. But of course, the rich don't need to do these things. Only the poor do, and the law looks to their misconduct because it threatens existing property relations, power relations, and all the rest. So when we lean into policing as a solution to any kind of problem, what we're doing is enabling an institution that has always existed to produce inequality, to maintain the status quo, or to maintain the systems of exploitation that dominate any particular era.
Yep.
So, early policing is created mostly in the early 19th century around the primary mechanisms of exploitation at that period: colonialism, slavery, and industrialization, especially the industrialization of the rural working class pouring into cities. And policing gets created to manage resistance
Yes.
to those regimes of exploitation. And that's what we're seeing today, right? Policing is managing people's responses to economic precarity, lack of health services, so people are participating in black markets like drugs and sex work and stolen goods, and people are living out of doors, and people are experiencing mental health crises. And basically, if you look at what police actually do, they're not chasing serial killers and bank rob, right? They're micromanaging the lives of these populations at the losing end of these systems of exploitation.
Absolutely. It's almost like you study this. Thank you for breaking that down. No, I think it's really important because it's also, on Thursday we had Ken Klippenstein on the show and talking about sort of like what happens when you literally have standing armies, or you have like Northern Command, and Northern Command doesn't really do much. They like protect us against the eventual Chinese invasion. And you're like, what are you doing? And then of course a Trump comes along, or an authoritarian comes along, and is like, well, now you're going to be targeting cartels, and now you're going to help us drone strike a boat in the middle of the Caribbean. And so the same goes with, for example, the LAPD, which has an outsized budget compared to everything else in this city, and it's effectively a standing army. Well, what happens when you have your standing army and a so-called war pops off, even if, you are a sanctuary city, whatever that actually means? You're going to be used, as you said, to manage the resistance. And I think this is what's sort of gotten under my skin, Professor Alex Vitale, we're talking to, is that so many Democratic mayors and governors, like J.B. Pritzker have, and even Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass back in June, have basically said, Trump is sending the National Guard, Trump is sending, these ICE agents, but don't play into their game. And that translates to don't resist.
Mm-hmm.
Don't protest, don't resist them, don't film them, don't do anything, which, by the way, the amount of violence that has been wrought on the communities here and across this country versus the amount of violence that has been returned is wildly people are being very pacifist, to a point that I actually don't think I agree with, because I believe in a militancy, I believe in nonviolence, but I believe in militant nonviolence. So but to be fair, people are just like watching, filming, and not interfering with clear Gestapo. But I feel like the message from the party, the message from liberals is don't protest, because then you're going to lose the narrative. All you got to do is, skip into the ghetto and you'll be rewarded kindly. Truly, that feels like the message. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is, of course, liberal. It's a combination of liberal aversion to conflict, which is tied to a lot of this liberal myth making about legal formalism, that somehow the courts will, in the end, fix this for us. But that seems pretty naive right now, right? There's very little reason to believe that the Supreme Court is going to place any meaningful checks on what Trump is trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I think this is an incredibly misguided approach. And you can see that, for the Democratic base, this is not selling people. This is not the rhetoric that people want to hear. And then I'll just point out, remember at the beginning of Trump's first term, when he tried to have the Muslim ban, and people flooded airports around the country and brought the movement of rich and powerful people to a grinding halt, and all of a sudden policies got changed. No courts involved, no elected officials really, except showing up to support a mass movement. And that's ultimately, I think, the kind of resistance that's going to be required here. I don't think the midterm elections are going to totally save us in some miraculous way. The Democratic Party is doing everything it can to subvert an obvious victory.
Yep.
To snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And so we have to start relying on our own movements to try to create a base of power. And then ideally, out of those movements will come a new generation of leaders who we can hopefully put into some of these positions of power.
God damn it. I really hope so. I mean, I feel we are like teetering on the edge of some of the darkest times. We already are in it. It does. I've referred to it as a dirty war because it, a block down from you, people could have been disappeared from ICE. There's a feeling of helplessness. And I think Americans really do live under an illusion that we do live in a free country. And this has been the biggest lie forever. And we've known this for decades and decades and decades. It's like, try to exercise your First Amendment right and see what happens. And then you'll understand why it's important, because right now you can't, depending on what you want to protest.
Yes, we had 4 adjunct faculty members basically fired over the summer for participating in Gaza protests, and currently 5 faculty and 1 staff member under investigation for their support of those protests. So yes, it's a very chilling environment we're in, and it really calls for a very high level of solidarity.
Yes, exactly. Because I was going to say, like, the same was not happening when the George Floyd uprising was happening, right? And this is sort of where I think a lot of us leftists have been breaking our brains over. Don't you see this lack of solidarity, or the fact that if you had gotten fired for attending a Justice for George Floyd rally, that would be an insane thing to do. But anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, pro-genocide, like, that's all A-okay. Lastly, before you go, maybe you talked about SNAP benefits being, part of public safety. We know how much the little infrastructure we did have, whether it's around public health or education or, food assistance and health assistance, this is going away. This is going to lead to more destitution, more homelessness, for example, which is also kind of one of the prongs of supposed crime, is homelessness. You have Gavin Newsom once again trotting out, we're going to sweep more homeless encampments. Just as we face more destitution, like, just give me your thoughts on the criminalization of homelessness and where we go from here.
Yeah. So I think part of the reason that we're in the mess we're in is the complete breakdown of any progressive urban agenda on the part of the Democratic Party. That basically a complete capitulation to austerity, to neoliberalism, to a kind of race to the bottom, cutting taxes for the rich, giving away to Amazon whatever they ask for to hopefully get a couple of low-paid, ununionized jobs. And that has created this massive array of social problems that we label crime and disorder, and that we tell people the only solution to it is policing. And until we break out of that dynamic and offer people a real pathway to some kind of economic self-sufficiency, dignity, quality of life, I think we're going to be stuck in this dynamic. Now, of course, the good news is, new polling data shows Zoran Mandami over 20 points ahead of the next closest person, almost at 50%. So even if everybody else dropped out, he would almost certainly still win. He's 4 points ahead on a head-to-head with Cuomo. And Mamdani has been crystal clear. Mamdani has been crystal clear in saying that we have to have a left populist economic agenda.
Yep.
That rejects criminalization as a solution to our problems. And when we're crystal clear about that, it turns out to be remarkably popular. And of course, we've seen that with Bernie, and we've seen that with AOC. And we just got to get around the leadership of the Democratic Party, which still continues not to endorse Mamdani here locally.
I mean, it's the best thing that's ever happened to the Democrats, right, is Zoran Mamdani. And he's been, as he says, relentlessly focused on the working class. And he actually openly says that, he's talking to Trump voters because a working class agenda that, speaks to the basic needs of people is the antidote to fascism. And we've all been knowing that. We've known that historians know this. That is what causes the rise of of Nazi Germany is the amount of economic destitution. Hello. So anyway.
And he did well in a lot of the neighborhoods that Trump did well in New York. Yep. Immigrant neighborhoods who were frustrated with the mainstream of the Democratic Party, which said to them, we're here for suburban soccer moms, not for working class people.
Yes, exactly. Yes, they did.
They heard it and they went looking for someone else. And Mamdani has a strategy to bring them back.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.